Hello, welcome to the Authentic Role-Playing Podcast, featuring independent DMs and GMs of tabletop role-playing games. My name is Alexis, Smolensk, and I'm coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, in Western Canada, having just gotten over the plague, that is, the common cold. Today I'm talking to Fuzzy Skinner, who comes to us from flyover country in the United States. She is the creator of a fantasy campaign that has been running since 2015. Hello, Fuzzy. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah. Now, for those unfamiliar with the podcast, I'll just explain that we're ordinary, everyday role players. We're not celebrities. We're not experts. We're just people running our own games. Some of my guests have been doing this for a long time, and some of us are just starting. How long have you been gaming, Fuzzy?
Well, I started, probably my first thing that happened was in high school. I was playing a lot of roguelike games like Rogue and NetHack, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this without needing a computer? And then I found D&D and realized, oh wait, someone already thought of this many years ago. So then my first actual experience running a role-playing game was in 2011 with the Pathfinder RPG beginner box, and I started off as the game master for that because there was no one else around to run it. And then since then, I've done a few different systems, and right now I'm mostly running basic fantasy RPG.
How did you actually fall into role-playing? When did you know it was really something special?
Probably the main thing that happened was when I was running games every so often, and it was like, yeah, this is fun. But a big kind of turning point for me came when I was running a game a couple years ago, and an event happened in the game. Players were like, well, this is some unholy altar. Can I pour holy water on it to bless it? And I did that, and they poured it over, and I can't really recreate it here, but the way I described it, everyone was just kind of surprised. Like, I saw they were all like, wow, that was fascinating. And that was the first time I was like, yeah, I want to do that as often as I can.
You've brought a lot of new players into your campaign?
I tend to have new players pretty often because it's a rotating group, but long-term players are slightly less common. I've only had probably about 10 of those total, and the length of time they stay varies just depending on when they're busy. A lot of them are in college, so there's always work to be done there.
So what's it like when you introduce somebody new to the game?
Oh, generally, as far as like social convention, it's pretty relaxed. Usually they're a friend of a friend, and it's pretty straightforward. There have been a few people who have never played an RPG at all, and I'm generally able to get them up to speed on it. Usually I make comparisons to video games, although it's obviously not the same thing. But most of them pick up on the concept pretty quickly, if not the specific rules.
Do you have any examples of somebody you can think of that walked into it and got it right away?
Well, one that surprised me was one of my friend's brother, big video gamer. My friend had tried explaining to him what D&D was like, and he just could not get it. He would just be like, wait, so it's a board game? And he'd be like, no, it's not a board game. And he's like, so do you use cards? And this went on for some time. One night I was over, and they were both fairly drunk, and they were like, hey, let's do drunk D&D. I was like, okay. And surprisingly, this guy who couldn't understand the concept of the game, very drunk, was able to play a cleric pretty well. Like, he instinctively got it right away, even though for some reason when he was sober, he just couldn't wrap his head around it. Not a great example, but...
Well, I have heard some people have some issues with drinking during D&D, but I can't figure out why. It's not like you operate heavy machinery when you're playing D&D, but I have heard that's an issue some people have. Me, I couldn't do it because I really have to stay clear as a DM, but I don't think I'd care if my players did it. Have you played very much?
I've gotten to play a lot more in the past year or so. Initially, I was running all the time just because I had to do it or no one else will. But more recently, especially my social circle's expanding, I'm able to play in more games. And as far as like preferring one, like DMing versus playing, there's things I like about both. As long as the players are cooperative and as long as the referee in question is good at what they do, then it's going to be a good time.
Where are you playing? Is it mostly adventure games or game store game?
Oh, no. Mostly it's games like on campus. Like most of my players and stuff are in college, and I only graduated last year, so we mostly meet up there. A lot of people live on campus, so we just meet in one spot on campus and play there.
Have you ever spun off a DM from one of your campaigns?
Somebody...
who decided to play?
That has happened. Not exactly... Not in the same... Like, not someone running in my same world, but one new player that me running a game was his first time ever playing D&D. Really enjoyed it, and he was like, I want to try this. And we were like, okay. And surprisingly, he's done a very good job so far. Like, he took to it like a bird to air.
Well, how much preparation did he have? Because that's something that I am curious about, is how we bring other people along.
Most of the preparation, he sought out advice from the other players and people who had experience running. I wasn't able to give him system-specific advice because he's running like D&D 5th edition, but I did give him some pointers, and he was, to his credit, he was very open, saying if he forgets a rule or if he gets something wrong, don't be afraid to correct him on it, which I think is much better than the attitude that the DM is always right even when they're wrong.
Do you think it's something rare for people to pick it up that quickly?
I think so. The other games that I've played in with people that are new, there's usually like a few bumps, and they're kind of learning the system as they go. It is less common for people to take to it that well initially. Some people have played in games where it was kind of new to them, and they were kind of struggling a bit, but they still tried their best, and they were able to produce a good game, if not a great one.
That's what I often hear. People are trying their best, they're digging in, they're doing what they can, and almost all of us have a story about how we were at the beginning. I don't hear any stories about the people who were just flat out terrible at it. I don't hear total fails. I don't hear anybody talking about that.
Well, there's one game, I'm not sure if it was this person's first time running. I'm going to protect their anonymity so their friends don't laugh at them. But
obviously. Yeah,
the first time I'm playing a game by a person, it went really badly. We made characters, we made something like 10th level characters from scratch, and they said, no, you can't play a fighter, but you can play a gunslinger. And then we basically just fought, I don't know, a zombie beholder or something for 3 hours, and then at the end of it, everything was being packed up, and I asked, oh yeah, how much XP do we get? And this person said, well, I wasn't really planning on giving XP since this is a one-shot.
So it doesn't matter.
Right. It was like, well, why was I sitting there suffering through this for 3 hours?
Well, how were you the first time?
Ooh, the first time, I will have to, I would have to ask one of my players to make sure, because one of my players has been literally with me since the beginning, taken breaks since then, but I like to think that I wasn't that bad as the person I just talked about, but I know that I definitely made some mistakes on the rules. I definitely, because I was a teenager and I didn't know any better, I did fudge die rolls behind a DM screen.
Those are all natural things. The first time you're going to play, you're going to do things like that. But how did you feel like yourself? Not about how well did you play, but just what emotional state do you remember at the time?
Oh, it was euphoric, definitely. I was
not panicked?
Generally, no. There were one or two times where it was kind of, oh, what do I do now? But generally, I was able to kind of roll with it.
As a DM, how do you think you do now?
Yeah, about average. The more familiar I get with the rules, the more natural it comes to me, so I don't have to stop and think about something. I can just recall something off the top of my head. And part of that is just regularity and familiarity. At one point I was like that with Pathfinder, of all things. I don't know how I did that in high school.
You mean because it was difficult and you climbed that hill anyway?
Yeah, that was the thing that I went with, and Pathfinder is such a front-loaded system in terms of complexity. It's not that complex to play, but making characters just takes so long. But I think that's part of that is the credit of the inner box being a really effective product in teaching the game. Because if I'd been stuck in the mid-'80s or something with the limited introductory things there, I don't know if I would have been able to jump into something about as complex as AD&D plus Ars Arcana.
You're playing D&D now, yes?
Yeah, it's like a retro clone of a game, but yeah, basically D&D.
Okay. Would you say that now it's the same game that it used to be, or do you look at it differently?
Substantially the same as far as what tends to happen and what kind of things the players tend to do. The main difference is the way that I run. I try to be a lot less linear now than I used to be. I remember I have an old blog post where I was saying, well, I'm going to consider something I've never done before, opening up my world and letting the players explore it wherever they want.
Yeah.
And now I look back on it and I'm like, wow.
Why wow?
Like, wow, I can't believe that I thought keeping them on a railroad was a good idea.
And they've taken to this?
Oh yeah. A lot of players want like some form of structure, and I can provide that if they want, but I do try to give them some choice. I don't want to just put them on a completely linear plot and say, no, you can't go there, just because they're going to ask a very logical question. Well, why not? And generally, there's no good reason why they can't go somewhere, unless it's something like a sunken city underwater. I'm like, no, because you can't breathe underwater and the pressure would crush you. But they haven't asked to go there yet, thankfully.
What kind of adventures do you run generally?
Generally, it's like fairly basic for the most part. It's, there's a dungeon site, and they go through a brief wilderness kind of crawl to get to the dungeon site. Very frequently getting lost because they don't follow trails. They're like, no, we'll just go straight north. We're not going to follow the trail. Okay. But, and then they get to the dungeon site, whatever it is, a castle, cemetery. They'll go through it and they'll find whatever MacGuffin or person they're looking for, bring it back. I've been trying to get them to make like base camps kind of out in the wilderness, but so far they only have one and they don't use it much.
Where do you get your ideas from?
From media. Movies, books, sometimes video games, but not as often. I'm kind of helped in that by the fact that a lot of my players are not, well, I would say poorly read, but I don't think that's an exactly right term when it applies to movies. But I try not to borrow entire plots wholesale, but I'm happy to lift elements and references here and there. Like all of the bodies of water in my setting are named after the cast of Scanners.
This is an interesting choice.
So far, no one's picked.
Can you give me another example?
Right.
Something that you fit into an adventure.
There's you may have heard of this one. It's a ninja movie by Godfrey Ho called Ninja Terminator, and there's some scenes that have kind of become memes on the internet. But I decided that a good quest for them would be to recover pieces of not the Golden Ninja Warrior, but the Golden Goblin Warrior. So they were off to recover the pieces of that and try to reform the Empire, as it were.
Tell me why I should come play in your game.
Like as opposed to someone else's game,
as opposed to someone else's game. And you're saying, come on, you should come play in my game. What would you tell me?
Something I try to strive for in my games is it's tough, but fair. I'm not going to specifically go gunning for the characters. They can die. They have died before. But if that does happen, you're not losing like this 10-hour investment into it that you might put into some games. It's like, okay, just roll up a new one. It shouldn't take long. We'll wait.
You obviously do encourage new people to play. You have new people that come and play in your game all the time. Do they just walk up and join?
Generally, they're like referred by other people. Like I said, friends of friends. They're like, hey, we're doing a game. There's usually not as much preference as to, Fuzzy is doing the basic fantasy game, or X is doing the D&D 5th edition game. Usually it's just, hey, there's a game. Are you interested in playing a game? Because there's a lot of rotation. And, people either say yes or no. And as far as why they would want to play this particular one, I would say mainly because it appeals to some people that other games don't appeal to as much. Like one of my players has social anxiety, doesn't like heavy in-character conversation and putting on funny voices and accents and doing stuff that happens in a lot of other games. Not saying that's bad, they just don't enjoy that at all. So I can definitely run a more combat-focused game or more action-focused game that's not as reliant on talking to NPCs.
Do you talk about your gaming very much to people?
I do somewhat. One of my players is also my girlfriend, so we talk about that somewhat. I talk about it with some of my friends. Usually not like extremely in depth. So like I'll just say, hey, I'm considering doing this. I'm considering adding bards to my campaign, or I'm considering changing the way hit dice are adjusted. And they'll either be like, oh, that's cool, or they are generally like accepting of whatever it is, so long as it doesn't put them at too much of a disadvantage in the game. But as far as outside of my circle of players, I generally don't talk to other people about it a whole lot.
Yeah. Well, you know the term metagame in reference to role playing.
Oh yeah.
You talk about
Right.
what would you like to do with your campaign, or the various questions about what's the meaning or purpose of various elements of the game, or just the preparation itself. Do you think much about the metagame?
Generally, when I'm like when I'm at the table, I am usually just playing the game. It's when I'm away from the table and I have too much in my hands that I start thinking about the metagame. Like, well, is a druid really a subclass of cleric, or are they more of a magic user? That kind of thing.
In the bigger picture, do you do much preparation for your games?
Yes, I definitely try to. Sometimes I have skimmed on it a little bit because it's a thing I'm familiar with, but I do try to be certainly prepared enough for the actual stock dungeon as such. I like to do that as far in advance as possible. During breaks, while everyone's on a lunch break from the game, is usually cutting it a bit.
Do you ever step outside of yourself and wonder about how much time you spend on the game? Not just the time playing, but the time thinking about it, the time planning for it.
I have definitely thought about it a lot recently because since I started putting my rules onto a wiki, I have even more chances to DM. I don't have to think, well, no, I don't have time to think about this right now. My first instinct is, oh, cool, let me go write that down in the wiki right now, and it'll be there. So I feel like even if I don't think as deeply or like as concentrated as I sometimes used to do, it is more frequent.
Would you ever give up DMing?
Like just DMing?
Yeah.
Possibly if either there was a time constraint on my part, or if I just found a game that I was just absolutely enthralled with and never wanted to do anything else.
If we could duplicate you, if we could make another fuzzy, and the other fuzzy was prepared to run all the time, would you be good with running in your own game?
I would. Well, I certainly couldn't play against myself because it would just turn into a contest of who could try to outwit the other, and it wouldn't go anywhere. Everyone else would get bored and leave.
If I was running myself, our experiences would go left and right pretty quickly. For a while, I think I could read myself as a player. I could identify what the DM, Alexis, was doing, and I would be able to guess ahead of time. But I think that after a while that there'd be just a separation of experiences that would go on for a while. And if I wasn't running, I was concentrating on other things. I don't think that I would be trying to best myself. I don't think I'd be trying to compete with myself. I'm not really a competitive person. But you're saying you would be.
I tend not to be a competitive person where other people are concerned, but a lot of the things I do are trying to improve myself in some way or compete against myself, like how much I play Tetris. I'm always trying to beat my high score. And you have a good point about the over a long period of time, if the two fuzzies were separate, then they would have separate experiences and thoughts and memories. So that is a very good point. Yeah, I definitely don't try to compete with other players or compete directly with the DM if I'm playing a game someone else is running. It's more fun to me to kind of collaborate, even if it's not necessarily in the kind of hippie peace and love and friendship way. It can still be cooperative.
Suppose that we put the other you aside, and I just asked that what kind of issues have you personally had with DMs?
Part of it can be not making things clear up front, like not making the expectations clear. Like the one that I told you before made no effort to tell us that we were just doing this for one session and that was it.
Yeah.
I put time and effort into that 10th level character, and then I was pissed off when I found out, nope, we're never going to be using that character again. Hand it over.
Have you ever rage
Um,
quit a campaign?
no, I've had players, well, mostly Wonder who rage quit one of my campaigns. I've never rage quit a campaign. Generally, I'll like wait until the session's over and then just kind of quietly never show up again.
How did you feel when it happened to you? I know when it happened to me, it was rough. It was a 6-year friend. It was somebody I was very close to, and yet when it went up, we didn't talk to each other again for years and years and years.
The one person that rage quit my game, it was someone I'd known, not really closely, but for a while, and they were annoyed that their character had died. I was like, well, sorry, that happens sometimes. They said they would only come back and would only bring their posse back, their little word. They called their other friends the posse. If I retconned it so it never happened and they changed the game system completely, like from AD&D to Savage Worlds, and I was like, yeah, I have no qualms about what I did. You could argue that it was like slightly unreasonable odds I put them against, but that is not really a proportionate response.
I like how they tried to take other people along with them as extortion.
Right. They failed to consider that I didn't know those people that well either. So I was like, well, okay, bye.
I have had times when, not rage quitting, but I've had times half my party left for one reason or another. I've had some very strange situations. I had one situation where two people were dating each other, and then she slept with one of the other guys at the table. And that situation, not obviously not there, right? But she had been dating him for some time, and it came out during a game. And I mean, that was all the writing we were going to do that night, because it was just, first it was the explosion of them against each other, and then it was the three of us that were left over afterwards just talking about the explosion. There was just,
Right.
there's going to be no gaming, Okay, well, they're all gone. So anyway, the orc says, there's no chance of that.
I haven't had that experience, although I think that's partly because probably half of my players are asexual, so that particular thing is probably not likely to happen. But
it stands to reason. They are human, and they have human needs, and they do human things, and sometimes
right,
non-game things turn up at the table, and
yeah,
it's just normal. There are some nights that are just not a good night for gaming. Do you ever have any trouble really maintaining control?
when you say control, do you mean like just kind of keeping the game moving, if it's cutting down on side talk, that kind of thing?
Well, I will admit, if I'm running 6 or 7 people, which is normal, if I'm running 6 or 7 people and I'm concentrating on trying to get everybody stoked and excited and tense, the noise at the table will tend to rise. And at some point, there might be somebody who I just thunder at. Will you please shut the... And boom, dead silence. The DM has spoken and the DM has dropped the hammer and everybody's quiet again. I have to do that every once in a while because I play with some pretty boisterous people. When I do it, I don't like it. If I can get through a session without even raising my voice a little bit, I prefer it. But I'm a pretty volatile, passionate person as well. So I start to lose control, and I know that when I do that, that's me losing my grip on my own sanity in the midst of the mayhem. So do you ever have any situations like that?
I'm kind of the loud one at a lot of my games, but generally, what I did when I was running different kinds of games, like almost entirely dungeon focused, was the players spent too long talking to each other and wondering, well, what should we do? Should we do this or that? Or just talking out of character about movies and stuff. I would just roll a wandering monster check, because I was like, well, if your characters are communicating this information to each other, they're probably making a similar level of noise. So something nasty with sharp claws and teeth might hear them. They would eventually realize, oh wait, maybe our characters should not talk so much.
Now, when you're saying that they talk a lot, do you mean that they're talking about stuff in the game, or they're talking just talking?
It's usually, sometimes it kind of goes like almost like split down the middle of the table. Like if I can get them talking about something in the game and debating what their best option is, I feel like that's a good spot to be in. If they're that invested in the game, that they're going to keep talking like that and just trying to figure out what should we do so that our characters don't get killed. That's a good spot to be in. But if they're just talking about how great the newest Marvel movie is or whatever, then I'm like, hey, so I'll kind of restate what they see in the room to try and get their minds back in the game.
I've often experienced the thing where players who are planning, where they get into that planning phase that you're talking about, they will plan, and then they will plan, and then they will plan and plan and plan. And every once in a while, somebody will say, well, what is the plan? And then they'll plan some more. And it's getting pretty obvious that whatever it is that they're planning to take on, the castle that they're going to raid, or the dragon that's in the lair below them, that, they're getting all suited up to go fight, and so on and so forth. It's getting pretty obvious with all the planning that they're not ready to go yet. That's part of it, right? They're just not ready to actually step in. Do you have that?
That's a pretty interesting point. I'm not sure if I've had them exactly like that, but then a lot of my players are sort of hack and slash. Just, smash the door down, worry about it later. One character, I had one player who even, as soon as I drew a line on the mat, she was like, I smash it down. I'm like, it's not a door, it's an open archway. She's like, I don't care. I'm like, okay.
Going back through maybe 4 or 5 parties that I've run, there always tend to be a few cautious people, and there always tend to be a few not so cautious. And as the game goes on and the not so cautious people continue to die and the cautious people continue to live, most of the time the not so cautious people begin to get it in their heads that maybe we should be more cautious.
Right. And I know certain game systems, obviously I don't want to go into an edition war, but certain game systems are more conducive to that than others, especially games where they have very few hit points, very limited spells, and they have to consider all their resources carefully. It pays to be cautious instead of just running in and killing everything, because they will quickly die because they just, they have 5 hit points. You're not going to last very long in a burly brawl.
Even 35 doesn't last that long, right? Even 35 hit points. It's not like 4th edition where we all have 200 hit points and we can stand and slug and slug and slug for a really long time before we decide to run away.
Yeah, and actually, funny thing about 4th edition, before I even started playing the game, I was negative things about 4th edition were already reaching my ears. I was just looking online, I was like, oh hey, starter set, D&D starter set. That's kind of cool. And then every single comment on that store page was, no, it's 4th edition. Why did they make it 4th edition? This is awful.
You played Pathfinder, where healing raineth from the sky. There's no end of healing in Pathfinder. So again, you can certainly gear up and just go piling through any open doorways that you want to pile through, and not worry that much that you're not going to make it. Game's designed for that.
Yeah, and that's some people really like a very hack and slash style of gameplay, and I can certainly see the appeal of that, especially as a teenager, where I wanted to have the best character who's invincible and the best at thieving and ate dead bodies because they were so dark and edgy. I played a wizard folk. That's how I was in high school, but
we all played that kind of character when we were in high school.
Right.
There's something about having the gloves off. I grew up in a very repressed time. I grew up in the 1970s, and there was very little you could do about, getting the gloves off that you might have. The movies certainly weren't that grisly, and the books that you could buy certainly weren't that grisly. And so when we played D&D, it was all blood, mayhem, and slaughter, and as many as we could kill, and every evil thing that we could do. I didn't play in a good party until pretty much the end of my playing experience. Most of the time during high school, it was always evil. We were looking to kill anything that moved, and we liked it. I mean, that's all we wanted to do.
Right.
Which is a way of getting your frustrations out, right? I don't like my teachers. I don't like my parents. I don't like my prospects for life. I don't like anything. I can't get a girlfriend, but I can kill all of these people in front of me. I think that's what a lot of us were like when we were young. Obviously, it's not what I think about now because I have such higher ideals. Such higher ideals now than I had when I was a teenager. Yeah. And that's half a lie. But I want it to mean more. I don't know. Do you get much tension in your games?
In mine, sometimes. Like when you say tension, you mean like in the game itself, not like the players hating each other?
Yeah, I mean in the game itself. I mean moments where people have to get out of their chairs and walk around because they're starting to feel that every die roll means a little, that it's more important than they're comfortable with it meaning. They throw the dice and it misses and they just lose it on the dice.
Generally, I have had a few of those. Probably not as many, just because there's the longevity isn't the same yet. Like I don't have very many high level characters in my campaign just because there's always new people cycling in and other people have to take a break for a while.
Yeah.
But there have been things like that, and some of the tension I think can come from situations where they're really close. Like if they get killed in the first room of the dungeon or whatever, then it's like yeah, my character's dead. But I had one time they were like fighting inside an abandoned church, and then the body of the church's warden was dropped down from the ceiling on a rope, and then a bunch of zombies were filing into the room, and everyone was really tense and really fought as hard as they could to get out of that. And this was like at the very end of the evening, so it was built up after a lot of other things had happened.
Well, sometimes the dice can do it for you because the monster misses and misses and misses, and the players miss and miss and miss and miss. And just the fact that nothing is being resolved because the dice are just not being friendly.
Yeah, that can definitely contribute, like combat kind of dragging on somewhat. That's one of the reasons why I eventually decided that a 1 minute long combat round in AD&D was just completely ridiculous. Because I've sparred with my some of my friends using wooden weapons and swords and stuff, and it is exhausting to do that for even 1 minute at a time.
From what I've read, is anything after 2.5 minutes is really starting to get both sides in a battle overheated, and that in real battle, in real war, people gave up. They just pulled back. They both step back 20, 30, 40 paces, and they yell at each other for a while, and then when they've rested, they go again.
That's kind of like how it happens in the Iliad, except that they never get tired. They just stop in the middle of battle for some reason.
Oh, that might be it. That was pretty good. One last question. I've been arguing through these podcasts that we spend too much time looking for solutions for game problems. Not enough time on the problem itself. What are your thoughts on that?
I tend to not worry about it too much. I always say that my very first gaming group was kind of a trial by fire as far as learning how to run games, because out of the 4 players, 3 of them had either ADD or ADHD. So keeping everyone focused on the game was just a massive challenge. And compared to that, like a lot of the stuff, like people looking at their phones, I'm like, that's not that big a deal for me.
But in terms of investigating game problems, do you think we rush to solutions too quickly?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a thing that happens. Instead of asking why are you having this problem, it's just, oh, here's how to fix it. Away. I try to do like a cure-all when that may not be appropriate or possible in every case. I have seen like descriptions of those things online. There's like some little wikis and articles and things people have made saying, oh, well, this behavior is this and it happens because of this, but nothing kind of collecting it all in one place. And also a lot of that's mixed in with just like outright intentional silliness, like the 1D4chan. It's like a wiki that has stuff on D&D and war games, and it's got like really interesting advice and thought and like statistical analysis and things in there, but it's mixed in with memes and silliness. So I think having something that's a little more serious-minded could definitely be useful. Not having to sift through a bunch of animated gifs of orcs running around.
Maybe there's a way to crowdsource some sort of a problem-finding solution as opposed to a problem-solving solution.
Yeah, that'd be cool. It'd definitely be something to look into.
Well, thank you, Fuzzy. We've covered a lot of ground today, I think. Now, my guest today has been Fuzzy Skinner. I'm Alexis Smolensk, and you've been listening to the Authentic Role-Playing Podcast. Please use the subscriber button and subscribe. And if you're looking for more advanced content about Dungeons & Dragons or how to run the game, visit my blog at Tao of D&D or buy my books, How to Run, An Advanced Guide to Managing Role-Playing Games, or The Dungeon's Front Door. Both are available on Amazon, iBooks, or Lulu. You can also visit my other blog, Tao's Masterclass, for point-by-point recommendations on how to be a better Dungeon Master. You can find links for all of this content in the description below. So I wish you all the best for your campaign. I urge you to keep listening to the podcast, and I urge you to keep reading and working on your worlds and making D&D a better game every day. Thank you.